It was kind of surreal that, after 3 weeks of training, he was finally getting his hands on an actual weapon. The DI stood at the front of the class, a weapon held in each hand. "Ladies, this is the HSR-11, the standard issue rifle of the Imperium." She lowered the massive weapon in her left hand and raised the relatively diminutive one in her right. "Gentlemen, this is the HSC-9, the HSR's slightly smaller equivalent. They are both directed energy weapons with a 90 and 40 round magazine respectively. They can kill at..." As the woman continued to rattle off the weapon stats, Jason found his eyes straying to the one in front of him, or rather, the pieces of the one in front of him. Apparently before they could so much as fire the weapon once, they all had to be certified, which meant taking the weapon apart and putting it back together, over and over again. According to the DIs, by the time the next 3 days were through, they were going to be able to pull this weapon apart and put it back together in their sleep. Which made sense, given that they might have to diagnose and fix a weapon malfunction in the middle of a firefight. Jason's inner engineer was overjoyed, but his inner recruit was quaking in his boots. If there was one thing he'd learned during his time at the Crucible, it was that the instructors didn't make idle promises. "Human, are you listening?" Jason's head shot up. "Of course, Sergeant." The woman in question grinned. "Then you'll have no problem telling me how the HS weapon system's less than lethal firing mode functions." Jason felt his stomach drop out from under him. He'd lied as more a matter of habit than anything else, the current situation reminding him of time spent in university lectures. Well, there was nothing for it. He was already in the shit, he might as well try and dig himself out. The weapon emits an infrared laser pulse that ablates the surface of the target, creating a short-lived burst of plasma. That burst of plasma creates a rush of sound, light, and electromagnetic waves that causes pain and paralysis in living beings. It was a total guess, but he vaguely recalled a few forum posts from people who had observed Imperial Marines putting down riots. They'd suggested that the aliens' weapons might have functioned in that manner. Now he just had to hope they were right. The woman frowned, her tusky maw downturned. "A succinct summary, even if it was worded differently to my own." Jason resisted the urge to shrug, even as he inwardly whooped and hollered with joy. "Alright, ladies," the woman continued. "Now you know how it works. Next you need to learn how to take it apart, clean it, and put it back together." As she continued to speak, he found his gaze wandering once more. It was a dumb thing to do, he knew, but after his talk with Tarsal, he'd found his mind wandering to different topics. The Imperium, humanity, gender roles, sex. Why was he treating his current circumstances as some kind of god-awful punishment, when, if you looked at it from a different perspective, wasn't it an amazing opportunity? By denying that, wasn't he basically doing the same thing as the guys back on Earth who were still fighting the Shovanti, being too blinded by pride to see the opportunity for profit? As he was pondering, his eyes landed on his neighbour, Adrilla. He hadn't really spoken with Adrilla much. To be fair, beyond Raisha, he hadn't really spoken with any of his female cadre mates. Tarsil's icy presence kept them at bay, though apparently the oblivious Raisha was pretty much immune to the male's glower, much to the alien male's silent irritation. Refocusing on Adrilla, he tried to recall what little he knew about the woman. Like most of the recruits, she was just into her majority, about 19 by human standards. Like Raisha, she was from a colony world. She used to work on her family's farm before she signed up. By Shovanti standards, she was considered a bit of a bumpkin, though she strenuously denied that accusation and wasn't shy about using her fists to back up her claims. She was a little taller than average. Like most Shovanti, she had straight black hair that she tied back into a long ponytail. Her skin was a little lighter than average, but she had a fairly cute smattering of dark violet freckles across her lilac cheeks, shoulders and chest, which she could see ample amounts of given that the female exercise uniform was essentially a black tank top and shorts. Using that sixth sense the females all apparently had, it didn't take long for her to notice him looking, glancing up from her own weapon components. Her eyes widened slightly as she noticed he was actually looking back at her, though the brief moment of panic quickly turned into a slightly sultry smirk as she positively preened. The alien leaned forward, exposing the deep valley of her cleavage, as she stared challengingly back at him. He imagined this was the moment where a Shulvanti male would probably look away, feigning disinterest or showing real embarrassment. Jason winked. The effect was almost instantaneous, as the alien woman blushed a deep blue. She didn't move though, in fact, she seemed positively frozen in place. Chuckling internally, Jason turned away, returning his attention back to his own weapon. Yeah, he could have some fun with this. "Recruiter Driller," the DI roared from the front of the room. "Is there something of intense interest about our human recruit that I should know about?" "No, Sergeant." "Do I look like a damn sergeant, Recruiter Driller? Can you see any stripes on my toned shoulders?" "No." "No what, Recruit?" "No, Drill Instructor." "Then stop staring like a doe-eyed Araxi and get back to work." "Yes, Drill Instructor." Jason chuckled as he heard parts being hastily clacked together. Yes, he could have a lot of fun with this indeed. Of course, for all that he had a new plan to make his time in basic training a lot more enjoyable, that didn't change the fact that he was in basic training. It had been 3 days, and he'd been able to do little more than eat, drink, sleep, exercise, and relentlessly assemble and disassemble both real and imaginary weapons. "From the moment I start the timer, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds to disassemble the weapon." His instructor stood across from him. "I will remind you that failure to do so within the time limit will constitute a failure of the first section of your weapons certification program. Failing any part of the program will constitute a failure of the entire program. Failing the weapons certification program will result in a back class." Jason shuddered. No one wanted to be backclassed. It wasn't just the fact that a recruit would be leaving a cadre of people they'd formed bonds with, but more importantly, in Jason's eyes at least, they'd be stuck waiting around for a month until the next training cadre came through. A month on base that he was sure the DIs would make as unpleasant as possible. Probably. Given that he was part of the frailer sex now, they might go easy on him. Maybe. Not that he planned to bank on their instructor's seemingly non-existent sense of mercy. "I understand," he said, with a slightly dry mouth, fingers twitching as he mentally ran through the motions he'd been doing near constantly for the last 3 days. "Then you may begin," the instructor said, clicking the timer app on their Omnipad. Jason's hands were a flurry of motions as he pressed buttons, undid catches, and unlocked latches. It didn't take long for him to have the weapon down to its component parts. He also managed to do it without catching his fingers in or on any of the hard surfaces, which was an ever-present threat. A little nick would hardly have been an issue for him, but getting blood inside the weapon would be. "Done," he said, as soon as he laid down the last component. 45 seconds, the instructor said, a little surprised in her voice. "I guess those rumors about humans having nimble fingers are true." Jason almost rolled his eyes. Yes, his reflexes were a little faster than the average Shulvanti, but he was pretty sure his fast time could be more readily attributed to his engineering skills. It seemed even the instructors were willing to let their imagination get away from them when it came to humanity's vaunted sexual prowess. Of course, he was wise enough not to say any of that, as he waited for the instructor to move on with the next part of the test. "Alright, human, put it back together. You have 2 minutes. "Thank the Empress it's finally done," Raisha said as she slumped against the wall of the shower. It said a lot about just how mentally and emotionally exhausted the alien was that she didn't even ogle Tarsal and Jason as she did so. Or at least, not much. Not that Jason was in much of a state to notice her either. He was pretty occupied himself. "Are you staring at my penis, human?"
Ha! Gay!
That immediately put the females back up, and within moments it was business as usual, as the rest of the training cadre began nesting in. Silence reigned in the communal showers. Jason blustered a little as he realized he'd just been caught breaking one of the cardinal rules of the bro code. Don't stare at another man's junk in the communal showers. He couldn't help it though. He'd managed to avoid doing so up until now, but he was only human. He had limits. From a purely scientific point of view, He was curious. As a man, he kind of wanted to see how humanity stacked up, as it were. As Jason, he wanted to know if his new plan was even feasible. The last thing he wanted was to discover that it was like throwing a hot dog down a hallway. Finally, and most importantly, it was just so... He shook his head, deliberately looking up into his friend's entirely placid expression. Yes? He didn't know why he phrased it as a question, it just came out that way. Why? It's blue, he said, finally. That was really the clincher. A quick glance had confirmed that a human's equipment was more than up to the task of interfacing with a Shilvanti female. That wasn't why he had been caught staring. He just hadn't expected it to be so... blue. Yours is pink, Tarsal said very matter-of-factly as he looked down. Jason had to fight the urge to cover up, feeling fairly hypocritically more than a little violated by the alien's frank gaze. He also couldn't help but notice the excited expressions on the females watching. The twins, in particular, seemed a few seconds from bursting into ecstatic giggles. That's it, Jason said as he shut off the shower and grabbed his towel, wrapping it around his waist with not quite unseemly haste. I'm done. He strode from the shower, ignoring the disappointed faces of his fellow recruits as he walked past. Still, that didn't stop them from ogling his exposed torso as he passed. Is it not supposed to be pink? Tarsal called after him, sounding genuinely concerned. It's fine, he shouted back. Plan put the damn sexy aliens in their place was off to a rocky start. Punch me! I think I'm dreaming. While Jason's excitement wasn't quite as exaggerated as Reicher's, he found himself echoing the sentiment in some small way as he stared at the collection of drink dispensers, television screens, game tables, beanbags, and sofas. I stress again, recruits, the DI said from her position behind them in the building's entryway. Access to the recreation centre is a privilege, not a right. It will be the first thing revoked if any of you commit even the most minor of infractions. The cadre had just finished their 4th week of training, and apparently that engendered a massive loosening of restrictions, as well as access to a number of facilities that had not been available prior. Even the DIs themselves seemed somewhat jovial, even though they tried their best to hide it. They could now go home for 1 day of shell, the 2-day midweek break that was a weekend in all but name, rather than storming around the dorms, performing inspections and generally making the recruits' lives hell. Of course, one of them would still be remaining behind each shell to perform evening inspections and generally make sure the recruit's small section of the base didn't go to complete shit. Still, it was abundantly clear that recruits were now being trusted to be left relatively to their own devices for 2 short days each week. It was a small amount of freedom, given that they were still on an active military base and expected to act as such, but it felt massive after just over a month without any autonomy at all. Hell, in another 2 weeks, they'd apparently be able to apply for leave off base for the duration of shell. Something that was apparently allowed as a reward for exceptional performances. The proverbial carrot to the instructor's ever-present stick. He heard a small grunt as flesh impacted flesh, and rolled his eyes as he realised that someone had taken Reicher up on her offer. Alright, I'll be in the watch office, the instructor said as she started to turn away. I'll reiterate it again before I leave, though. You are still recruits in the service of Her Imperial Majesty the Empress. Act like it. With that, the woman was gone, and for the first time in a long time, the recruits were without immediate supervision. Contrary to Jason's expectation, things didn't immediately go wild. A lot of his fellow cadre members were almost skittish as they crossed over the room towards their desired recreations. Woohoo! Rashi yelled, breaking the mold as she positively leapt onto a sofa. Someone turn the TV on! I want to see how the Redwood Raiders are doing. That seemed to break the strange reticence that had come over all of them, as the rest of the cadre started to show some actual excitement. I should have known something was wrong with you, Reicher, another recruit said as she dutifully switched on the device. You're a dirty Raiders fan. Shut your heathen mouth! They almost took the crown last season, Raisa shot back, having to raise her voice as the ambient noise of conversation took over the room. While battling dozens of allegations about genetic tampering, another recruit said as she sank into an armchair that looked so scruffed it probably predated Shorvanti's space travel. You wouldn't have been able to tell that by the look of contentment that came over the prospective Marine's face, though. Horseshit. Our Legalisson is as clean as shit. Raisha's post turned to expletives as the TV displayed a news story featuring a number of brightly coloured Shorvanti at a press conference. Jason barely had to glance at the screen to see the words widespread and genetic tampering emblazoned across the bottom. Shit, shit, shit. He had to chuckle as Raisha continued to curse, echoed by the sound of her friends' guffaws of laughter. You want to see if we can grab one of the game tables? Tarsal asked from behind him, getting his attention with a light tap on the elbow. I can teach you how to play Persak? Jason almost nodded, curious about one of the aliens' games, before his eyes found a driller across the room. The busty recruit was reclining on what seemed to be the Shorvanti equivalent to a beanbag, all but dead to the world as she cradled a brightly coloured drink and stared at the ceiling in quiet contemplation. An act that had the alien's massive tank top clad breasts jutting out in a manner that was most interesting to a man that hadn't so much as had the opportunity to jack off in 4 weeks. Thanks, Jason said distractedly, but no thanks. Maybe next time? He didn't miss the way his friend's eyes darted between him and the reclining female, a small frown taking over his face. He didn't say anything though, simply nodding and walking off. Despite himself, Jason felt a little bad. While their shared struggles meant he felt close to just about all the people in the cadre, his only real friend and acquaintance was Tarsal, and maybe Raisha, if you squinted a bit. He'd get over it, Jason reasoned. Jason strode over to the alien, having to turn down a few offers for various recreations from his surroundings as he did so. He sank into a beanbag next to his target with a groan that wasn't entirely faked. For just a moment he considered putting his entire plan on hold in favour of just sitting in this delightfully oversized chair and doing nothing until they were all called out for evening inspection. Then, a driller shifted slightly, causing her tank top to ride up, exposing the smooth lines of her chiseled lilac stomach as they caught the light. The sight sent blood rushing through Jason's veins, and other places, and he managed to banish the momentary lethargy that had threatened to overcome him. He had to do this. For humanity. So, you want to fuck? Alright, so you may have seen the abridged note in the title of this video. Some of you may be wondering why, and others who have read the original story know full well why, and may be slightly peeved at me for doing this. What happens after this point is a sex scene. A very raunchy, explicit sex scene. This isn't about monetization or demonetization or any of that nonsense, which is usually the given reason people omit certain things from their videos. Many of you who have been with me for a long time know I've posted some really crazy, not safe for work stuff which I can't monetize before, and this decision isn't one I make lightly, cutting this sex scene out. But this is about being able to actually continue what I do, and I'm not prepared to potentially sacrifice everything I've built to a YouTube purge. However, if you really did want to hear me narrate a full-on alien sex scene, the unabridged version of this will be available on Patreon at the £5 tier with other material that could potentially get me banned on YouTube, and I can't play publicly. I just want to say thank you very much for all your continued support, and I hope, despite this, we're still good.